One of the things that happens when a group of people has been oppressed is that their history, their heroines and heroes, are often suppressed as well. To celebrate Pride, and as a regular feature of this channel, here are 5 gay men you should know and take pride in. By the way, don't worry, future profiles will focus solely on women and trans men and women. There's lots of speculation about why Billy Strayhorn seemed to avoid the spotlight, his being gay chief among them. Only thing is, he wasn't closeted. While it's true that he did take what many consider to be a backseat to Duke Ellington, Strayhorn's talent couldn't be hidden. The one thing that seems undebatable is that Billy Strayhorn was a musical genius. Composer, arranger, and pianist William Thomas Strayhorn was born in 1915 in Dayton, Ohio, and for most of his life he was drawn to music, attending a school for musically gifted children. One of his songs he's most known for, Lush Life, he wrote as a teenager. The lyrics of the song have some drama and melancholy you might expect from a teenager, but its musical composition astonishes me. The song is written in a key that lots of classical music is often written in. Actually, Strayhorn's work has a classical, slightly formal aspect to it, but it's never over-cerebral. At its best, it's sensual, openly emotional, and his up-tempo work, like the song Take the A-Train, swings as hard as any bebop tune of that period. Duke Ellington was already world famous as a composer and bandleader when he met Billy Strayhorn, and from their first meeting, Ellington knew that he had a talent that he wanted to be his partner, to collaborate with. Ellington was fond of saying that Strayhorn was my right arm, my left arm, and all the eyes in the back of my head, my brainwaves in his head, and his in mine. Strayhorn molded his style to Ellington's style so seamlessly that many people were unable to figure out who wrote what, often assuming all of the music was written by Ellington. Strayhorn was impeccably dressed and was said to be great fun to be around. His nickname was Sweet Pea or Strays. One friend said he drank and smoked, he was friends with everybody, and he was openly gay in an era when that was all but impossible. To say that Lena Horne and Billy Strayhorn were friends is to underestimate their bond. Lena Horne called him her soulmate. She often joked that if he were straight, she would have married him. Strayhorn met the jazz musician Aaron Bridgers in 1939, and they fell in love, living happily until Bridgers moved to Paris in 1947 to further his career. Billy Strayhorn participated in many civil rights causes. He was friends with Martin Luther King Jr., arranging and conducting King Fit for the Battle of Alabama for the Ellington Orchestra in 1963 for the review and album My People, dedicated to Martin Luther King. Billy Strayhorn died of esophageal cancer in 1967. Despite the overly romanticized homonormative myth that Billy Strayhorn died in the arms of Lena Horne, she said, in fact, she was out of the country when she got word that he died. He, in fact, died at home, being cared for by his partner, Bill Grove. Billy Strayhorn's compositions are considered some of the most harmonically and structurally sophisticated works in jazz. The pianist Donald Shirley remembered Strayhorn by putting it this way: many composers in jazz are good at thinking vertically and horizontally. Billy could write diagonals and curves and circles. The constraints of the larger society and its views towards gay people might have contributed to Strayhorn's decision to avoid the spotlight, and certainly Duke Ellington could have done better when it came to copyright and recognition of Strayhorn. But on the other hand, Billy Strayhorn got to live a life full of music, out of the closet, free to create and find love in his life, and that, and his genius, are to be celebrated, I think. I'll add a few links below to some of Strayhorn's work, including a video of him singing Lush Life. I'll also add my favorite Billy Strayhorn tune, the song A Flower is a Lovesome Thing. It's sung by Lena Horne. She's singing an arrangement by her husband, Lenny Hayton. I think it's one of the most lusciously sensual and evocative songs I've ever heard. Looking at runway shows today, you'd be hard-pressed to find a show without sneaker collaborations or streetwear, like the Balenciaga show with its Adidas tracksuits that just prowled the New York Stock Exchange. But years before any of these things that seem commonplace today, there was Willi Smith. Born Willi Donnell Smith in Philadelphia in 1948, Smith studied fashion illustration at the Philadelphia Museum College of Art and at the Parsons School of Design in New York. By the time of his death at the age of 39, he was one of the most successful black designers in the history of fashion. In 1976, he and a business partner started the successful label Willi Wear Limited, which captured the spirit of leisure wear. The company's first offering was a collection of clothes consisting of 13 silhouettes in soft cotton, manufactured in India and sold in New York. There was so much demand for the relaxed stylings and affordable clothes that the company's revenue grew from $30,000 in its first year to $25 million a few years later in 1986. Willi Smith was committed to the idea that clothes should be affordable, fun, and attractive at every price point. Smith hated the 1980s slogan, "Dress for Success," identifying more with individuality and vibrance of the young black and Hispanic people he saw on the streets of New York. Smith disliked the pretentiousness of haute couture. He said, "I'd love to have a salon and design couture collections, but it's so expensive." And he hated the fact that it locked most people out of access to those clothes. He said fashion is a people thing, and designers should remember that. One of the things that made Willi Smith stand out was his collaboration with artists and creative people, a thing that's pretty commonplace today. Smith collaborated with almost every major artist of the period. Through these collaborations, Willi Smith managed to do something that no other designer had been able to do up to this time. He merged the art world with the fashion world, which created an aesthetic, when combined with the streetwear of the time, that gave people a sense that they weren't just wearing clothes, but they were wearing ideas, they were wearing actions, they were making a statement about who you were and what you were a part of. Willi Smith and Peter McQuaid met at a friend's birthday party in the fall of 1985. McQuaid said, "I always thought to myself, damn, how did I manage to snag that?" I'm sure I wasn't the only man in New York who was asking that question. His friends were too. McQuaid called Smith a cultural vacuum cleaner, his brain constantly hoovering up any and all that was beautiful, intelligent, provocative, new. On April 16, 1987, Willi Smith was admitted to Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York. He died of complications from AIDS. He was 39 years old. Willi Smith's influence can be seen everywhere in modern fashion, from collaborations to streetwear being central to nearly every prominent fashion house in the world. Tamotsu Takeda, or Tamotsu Yato, was born in Nishinomiya in 1928. He was a self-taught photographer who never belonged to any of the many photographic organizations customary in Japan at the time. Looking at Yato's work, you might find it hard to believe that photography was not his first ambition. Like many young people, he worked at lots of jobs before finding his passion for photography. It was the publisher, Meredith Weatherby, who gave Yato his first camera. The two began a loving relationship that would prove to be beneficial for Yato both personally and professionally. In addition to being a publisher, Weatherby was a translator of the work of Mishima, and it was through Weatherby that Mishima and Yato met and began to work together. Tamotsu Yato published 3 books of his work in his relatively short career, and they are all stunning in their own way. His first book, Young Samurai, Bodybuilders of Japan, was published in 1967, and it's a study of Japanese bodybuilders. At the time, bodybuilding was not something widely accepted in Japan. The preface of the book was written by Mishima, whose focus in much of his work was reclaiming Japan's sovereign masculinity after World War II. Yato's interest was much more in the beauty and power of the Japanese male body. In the preface to his 1972 book called Otoko, Yato wrote, When these young men stand before my camera, I never find in their nudity the slightest trace of vulgarity or coarseness. Instead, it is a thrilling moment that arouses in me much the same emotions as those I feel when I see the perfect fruit just fresh from the tree. I'll come back to that book in a minute. Yato's second book, Naked Festival, published in 1968, is perhaps his most technically overwhelmingly beautiful work. Naked Festival is a sumptuous book of black and white photos documenting the Shinto-inspired ritual Hadaka Matsuri Festival that started over 1,300 years ago. Yato wanted to document and preserve these ancient rituals. The last book that Yato published in 1972 was the collection I referred to earlier, Otoko, Photo Studies of the Young Japanese Male. The book is essentially male nudes. Male nudity, like bodybuilding, was not looked upon favorably in Japan at the time, and that, combined with Yato's lack of professional connections in the world of photography, and his homosexuality, of course, meant that his work was not widely celebrated in Japan. And I have to say, it still isn't. In the West, Yato is considered to be a gifted artist. All three of his books are in the British Museum's permanent collection. Yato had a lifetime problem with an enlarged heart, and that is what took his life at the age of 45, in his sleep. Yato's work is a beautiful example of an artist and a gay man celebrating his heritage and his sexuality. Seidao Hasakawa was born in the Tokai area of Japan in 1950. He was self-taught. In 1973, he had his first exhibition in Tokyo. One of the things that set Hasegawa apart was his ability to work in many different mediums, from painting, collage, drawing, and sculpture. Despite the attention to his work from around the world and the relative silence from major art sources in Japan, Hasegawa refused to exhibit his work in Europe. Maybe it was because so much of his work had Japanese symbols and signs woven into it, and that was the conversation he wanted to have with other Japanese people. Hasegawa began traveling around Asia, especially India, Bali, and Thailand, and his work began to show those influences. I love how he mixes the images so beautifully with Japanese tattoos and masks and other ancient Japanese symbols. In 1996, the second collection of Hasegawa's work was published. Paradise Vision was a full flowering of Hasegawa's technical ability with his vision of the erotically sensual, the sacred, and the carnal. At the height of his artistic power, Seidao Hasegawa took his own life on November 28, 1999, by asphyxiation while on a trip to Bangkok, Thailand. According to Hasegawa's brother, the only clues left behind was a small piece of rope that had been used to hang himself, and a small stone which he had painted a portrait of Mishima. Hasegawa's death preceded the anniversary of Mishima's own suicide. In another one of these tributes to artists, I'll come back to Mishima and his influence on gay artists in Japan in this period. It really can't be overstated. When Hasegawa's brother cleaned out the artist's apartment, he threw out all of his artwork, unaware of their value. But luckily, he rescued them after receiving a letter posted from Bangkok by Hasegawa asking that his work be sold after his death. Seidao Hasegawa was consciously engaged in creating gay art. He said as much at the time. In fact, much of his work was published in gay magazines, creating a dialogue between the artist and the gay reader. What I love about Hasegawa's work is the collage of ideas bursting with energy. His work is at once erotic and playful and bold, blending cultures and symbols in a universe where Japanese men are the epicenter of male beauty. Richmond Barthé was born in 1901 and grew up along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Barthé was frequently sick as a child and enjoyed art as a diversion. As his talent became more evident, supporters in his Catholic parish raised money to fund his enrollment at the Art Institute of Chicago, one of only 2 art academies that accepted African American students at the time. Following his graduation from the Institute in 1929, Barthé moved to New York, where he established a studio in Harlem, immersing himself in the flowering of creativity in what we now refer to as the Harlem Renaissance. Barthé quickly cultivated a large group of artists, art scholars, and patrons who were fans and admirers, including the poet Langston Hughes. Barthé's work was inspired by his Catholic faith, his interest in African lore, and his fascination with theater and dance. Barthé left New York at the height of his success in the late 1940s, moving to Jamaica. He was quickly forgotten by many of the white New York art critics, but Barthé's career continued to thrive in Jamaica. In 1977, as his commissions dried up, Barthé found himself financially challenged and increasingly unwell, so he returned to the United States. He settled in Pasadena, California, where he was befriended by the actor James Garner. Garner became his benefactor, supporting Barthé financially while assisting him with copyright matters, securing him major shows in museums, and establishing the Richmond Barthé Trust. Barthé was not out and proud in the way we understand it today, but while living in Harlem, he certainly surrounded himself with gay and lesbian artists, and his work featured his admiration of the male body. Through friends of friends, it was fairly widely known that Barthé had had a relationship with one of the actors in the Broadway production of Porgy and Bess. In a letter to his friend Alan Locke, Barthé confessed that he had had romantic entanglements with other men, however fleeting, but that he had always longed for a lasting friend and romantic partner with another black man. Barthé became one of the first black artists, along with the painter Jacob Lawrence, to be represented in the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art's permanent collection. He received a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1940, and in 1945 he was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Letters. One of my favorite things is a few years after he arrived in Pasadena, California, the city renamed the street where he lived Barthé Drive. In 1989, Richmond Barthé died at his home in Pasadena, California, at the age of 88. Sharing the lives and the accomplishments of LGBTQ+ people is sharing our history. Their work is inspiring, and their ability to produce that work while seeking what we all want is doubly inspiring. Be sure to check the links below to see more work featured in this episode. And if there's somebody that you'd like to know more about, send me an email or leave that suggestion in the comments. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is vitally important. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.